Go ahead.
So I'm going to talk about the impact of coronavirus on the Jewish community, particularly the Orthodox community in the USA, Israel, and Europe. So I think I'm going to start by I'm going to divide what I'm talking about. I'm going to give an introduction as to what is Orthodox Judaism. Because I think a lot of people don't really actually understand what the difference is. So just some backgrounds. I think in order to understand the impact, you have to understand the community. And then I'll talk about the impact on the community as a whole and an impact on the family and some responses and what's going on socially. So Judaism, to get technical, is a monoist, non-dualistic, monotheistic religion, which means that the God of Judaism is a God of history, not just a God of creation. That means that God is involved in the world throughout history. And by non-dualism means that God is the creator of both good and evil. There's no separation between good and evil in Judaism. So dualism would say that while there's a God of good, there's an opposing force of evil, as you'll see in Zoroastrianism, elements of Christianity, and Mithratic religions. So for people to question why has Corona happened to us, we have to understand that everything comes from God, and that's the Jewish answer for these things. So Judaism is also decentralized, which means that there's no higher authority or hierarchy among the religion. We have rabbis, but the authority of rabbis in the modern day and age is not akin to a church hierarchy. Judaism believes in the Torah, which is a term that I'll use to mean the written scriptures, and also the Talmud, which is an oral tradition that's a commentary on the written scripture for applicable interpretations and laws. Orthodox Judaism is a stream of Judaism which orthodoxy means original. So within the last 200 years, there have been modern streams of Judaism which tend to be more culturally involved in Western culture, whereas Orthodox Judaism tends to be culturally Jewish, but live in Western culture. So even within Orthodox Judaism, there are numerous streams. It's like a big spectrum of practice. Towards the left of Judaism, you have more what's called modern Orthodoxy. They are culturally American, but religiously Orthodox, means that they keep Jewish law strictly, but they go to universities and they work in the secular world. Then to the right, you have Haredi, or ultra-Orthodox Judaism, which includes Hasidic Judaism, and these are more culturally isolated and insular. So this is an important issue, especially with coronavirus, is that the insularity of these Jewish communities means that everyone still goes to the same schools, they marry amongst themselves, we go to the same businesses, we rely on kosher food, which is food that has to be produced in a certain way according to Jewish law. And actually right now with coronavirus, there's starting to be a shortage of kosher food available. And then primarily there's the synagogue, which is the center of Jewish life. Synagogue prayer, communal prayer, is more important than private prayer. There are certain prayers that can only be said in public with at least 10 men. So you have to have at least 10 adult men in the room in order to read from the Torah or say certain prayers. And then there's also issues of technology. More right-wing Orthodoxy do not use internet, do not listen to radio, read newspapers, have televisions, go to theaters, read books, secular books, these kinds of issues, which limits their access to information. So back to the synagogue, as I said, there are 3 daily prayers, and synagogue life mandates public prayer of 10 people or more. And in the synagogue, people are coming in and out. There, in larger Jewish communities, you have synagogues where they don't even have locks on the door because people are coming in and out 24 hours a day, and there are prayers going on all the time. The Jewish community is highly social. As I said, we have the synagogue life, and on the Sabbath, which is every Saturday, Jewish people are not allowed to drive cars, light fires, use technology. It's stepping out of the secular world for a day. And so since people aren't allowed to drive, Orthodox communities seem to take over neighborhoods or take place in Jewish neighborhoods because people have to live within walking distance to a synagogue. So that's sort of a background of the Orthodox Jewish community. So now we can talk about the response to the coronavirus and how this has impacted. So initially, when coronavirus started coming to the United States and outside of Israel, there was usually quick compliance with advice to start social isolation. Outside of New York City in particular, most synagogues closed down around the time that state authorities started mandating the reduced interactions between people. New York City, however, where is the bulk of the Orthodox community in America, where as I said, they don't have access to technology, to secular newspapers and radios, they were not very aware of what was going on. So up until, last Sunday? I think it was 2 Sundays ago now. A friend of mine called me saying that he's going to a wedding of 1,000 people. And this is 2 days before New York mandated that everything would be closed down. And I told him, you can't go to this wedding. And he said, oh, it's going to be fine. God will protect us. That you're worrying too much. And so we would see a lot of weddings were still taking place up to the day that New York required these things stop. And it became such an issue that actually the White House had to call the leading rabbis in America and tell them that you have to stop community gatherings and weddings and synagogue prayers. So Donald Trump's son-in-law is Jared Kushner, and he's Jewish, and he arranged for the leading rabbis to have a conference call. And even on this conference call, the rabbis were asking, well, what if we all stand 6 feet apart and wear masks? Can we still have synagogue prayer? And the White House advised them not to. So immediately after this conference call, the Satmar Hasidic sect, which is the largest Hasidic movement in the world, the rabbi issued a letter saying that immediately every institution, every school, synagogue, mikveh would shut down immediately, and there will be no public prayers. So that was a quick response. But generally, the Orthodox community was ignoring the advice from the health professionals until it became an issue of law. But now the community is nearly universally quarantined. There's one yeshiva, which is a seminary for boys in Lakewood, New Jersey, which is still open, and they still have 150 students in there right now. And they're trying to get, the Jewish community itself is trying to get this school closed because obviously it's a big threat. So in Israel, so that's the American response. In Israel, where there's the relationship between the state and community, the Orthodox community is more strained. We saw earlier when Israel was trying to close down community prayer and shut down schools and close synagogues and all public gatherings, Israel's leading rabbi, his name is Chaim Kanievsky, he issued a letter saying, no, we have to increase public prayer. We have to increase children in school because in the merit of studying Torah and public prayer, these things will protect us from coronavirus. He cited a letter from the 16th century from Rabbi Akiva Eger, which states that if there's a pandemic, if there's a plague in your city, things, number one, you have to leave your city, and number two, he brought down that the angel of death keeps his slaughtering knife in the synagogue. So isn't there a better place for him to keep his knife? Says that when the angel of death comes in and sees that there's nobody in the synagogue, then he takes out his knife and starts killing people. So we see that the greatest protection is keeping public prayer. But since then, he's backed down and everything is closed now there also. But you would still see people getting married and having weddings and people flouting the laws there. But I think as of now, both in America and Israel, everything is closed and people are cooperating with the advice. So on the impact of society, obviously, this is a complete disruption of communal life and spiritual life. Since there is no synagogues, there's no public prayer, which means we can't read from the Torah, we can't have certain prayers, and the whole aspect of community has been disrupted and people feel alone. Stores are closed, kosher food is coming in short supply, and also I see that there's a lot of misinformation spreading across WhatsApp and social media in terms of remedies. I got a text from a Sephardic rabbi saying that 1 minute in the sauna will cure the coronavirus. Various other practical things and some spiritual issues. The family, Orthodox Jews tend to have large families and are very family oriented. You have multi-generational people in one home. Generally, especially in New York and Israel, you won't see so many nursing homes. People have their grandparents living at home. So with the spread of coronavirus, that this puts these older people in more risk. But also people are used to visiting their parents and grandparents every Saturday, every Shabbos, so every Sabbath. So this has been halted. One rabbi sent out a voicemail to the community talking about that now you have an opportunity to get to know your wife. Because now you're gonna be stuck in your house, you got to know your wife, and you're usually busy running around, going to synagogue, going to work and coming home, put the kids to bed, now it's time to go to bed. So now you're gonna be stuck in the house, don't get angry, be patient. Kids want to have time with their father, they never see you, and to not argue. And so this is an issue that I think the whole world is gonna have to face. How not to get frustrated and not to get what we call cabin fever. One other issue of specifically to the Orthodox Jewish community is the issue of mikvah. In Jewish law, after a married woman has her monthly period, she has to go to a special bath called a mikvah, which is a collection of natural water or rainwater. And she immerses in there, and then trying to be clean about this, she's able to be with her husband. But if she can't go to the mikvah, there are days of separation between husband and wife. They can't sit in the same bed, they can't touch each other. So now with coronavirus, in most cities, the mikvahs have been closed. So this is an issue that we will have to wait and see what's going to happen, as husbands and wives have to essentially live separately in the same house until the mikvahs reopen. As I said earlier, there were varied responses in the community. Since the synagogues were closed, initially we saw a lot of backyard congregations. People would gather people's houses in groups of 10 and would stand 6 feet apart from each other in order to say the certain prayers and read from the Torah. These have been squashed from the rabbis. They've said you can't do this anymore, we have to listen to the authorities. I've seen people having weddings in their backyards with 10 people only, immediate family, where people have been planning for months to have large families, usually of 500 people or more. So they're donating all the food from these weddings to the poor and for people who can't, or to the old people who can't go to the grocery stores. So they're recycling the food from the caterers, which is a positive, obviously. There's also large-scale distribution of WhatsApp warnings and alerts and fake news, as I'll explain some later. We've also seen activities for children. People have been publishing in Yiddish booklets about coronavirus and why the kids have to stay inside. And also, it seems that there's a growing acceptance of technology. So as the community, Orthodox Haredi community, has been against technology generally, now we'll see people having classes online and some prayers online. So there's an embrace of online technology, even though, as we'll see in a minute, that the internet is a part of the blame for coronavirus, according to some rabbis. We also see volunteer groups are growing in order to shop for groceries for old people. So now some famous rabbi responses. I already said earlier about Rabbi Kanievsky in Israel, who was calling for the schools to stay open in contradiction to the state authorities. But this has, I believe, been retracted, and the Satmar sect in America also has closed down their schools. I got a letter 2 days ago from the Alexander rabbi. He sent an interesting letter of encouragement to the community. But in it, he says that coronavirus is a virus that is spread through connection of one person to another. And he said that God will send, he sends a punishment according to the measure of the problem. So since the virus is being spread because of chaverus, because of connection between people, so too that the cause of the virus must be because of an over-connectedness between people. And he says, what is this connectedness? It's the internet. So he adjures people to not have internet devices in their home, and people who already don't, to take extra steps to distance themselves from the internet, because the internet is an impure device, an impure technology, and this leads to sin, and we have to avoid this. I saw that one of the influential rabbis in Paris, I believe, in France, he contracted coronavirus and already died. He was the rabbi of one of the Jewish high schools there. And also, by the way, when the White House called the leading rabbis in New York last week, I think 5 of those rabbis now have coronavirus. Rabbi Waxman from Muncie, he says that this is a time to reflect on the basics of Judaism, that while we have become materialistic in the fact that we have large gatherings of weddings and expensive weddings and fancy synagogues, that this is a time to take a step back and realize that we don't need all these things, that we can have personal prayer and hopefully grow out of this issue. I got a letter 2 days ago from the Sephardic rabbis, some Sephardic rabbis in Israel, who seemed to have published a letter saying that the upcoming holiday of Passover, on the first nights of Passover, there is a ritual dinner called the Seder. And since people are going to be isolated, that maybe we can use Skype technology or Zoom to telebroadcast the Passover Seder from your home to your grandparents who won't be able to leave the home, or that they should be included. This is notable because on holidays and religious days, you're not allowed to use technology. You can't turn on and off lights. But they said that if you turn on the computer, if you turn on Zoom before the holiday starts, you can leave the camera on and people can be included. However, this was later redacted when it started spreading like wildfire on social media that the rabbis are allowing computers on the holiday, so they've retracted it. So that was one issue of fake news, apparently. So the rabbi said, this is not what we meant. As I said, there was some blame on the internet and various causes as to what's causing it, whether it's the internet or gay rights. And these are punishments from God for these kind of things. We've seen this. Or that it's orthoprax. One says that since coronavirus, you could be infected and nobody can tell, and you can still, it's like you're throwing missiles at people because you're walking around through the store, you're making other people sick, even though you look healthy. That you can have people who look religious and they do everything religious, but seriously, they're making other people go off their ways. So a lot of these kind of superstitious ideas. And then I've seen again and again that God will protect us if we dedicate ourselves to him more. And like, God will not cause bad things to happen to us. So like, why should we take all these extra precautions? And that was something I saw initially before it became an issue of state law. One interesting thing that I have seen that I never heard of before this is called the Schwarze Chasana. Schwarze Chasana, which is Yiddish for the black wedding. So apparently this is an old protection against a plague. So what would happen is that there would be a wedding of two poor orphans, 18-year-old orphans, and with a black wedding canopy, and they get married in the cemetery. And the community in its entirety contributes to the financial support of this new home. So 100 years ago in Philadelphia in America, in the 1918 flu pandemic, they had this black wedding in the cemetery there, and also in Winnipeg, Canada. So this hasn't been seen for 100 years. I just saw a photograph of the cemetery in Bnei Brak in Israel where they had the black wedding canopy and a small group of people, and a marriage was performed in the cemetery in order to ward off the plague. So apparently the earliest source for this custom goes back to the 17th century in Poland. It's a Hasidic custom that if the community as a whole is supporting orphans and helping them get married and supporting them, that maybe God will look down upon the community and see how well they're behaving and protect them. So that's generally what we see here in the community. As I said, this is unprecedented. Everything is closed. There is no communal life at this moment. Passover is coming in 2 weeks. People are very anxious as to whether or not there's going to be enough food for Passover. As food on Passover is different, there can be no grain products, especially produced food, and nobody knows if there's going to be enough for everyone. We haven't seen such a shutdown of the Jewish community since World War II. However, we do see about 99% compliance with social isolation. My friends in New York tell me that they hear ambulances running all the time right now, and that the number of coronavirus cases is probably much higher than it is right now. And they're projecting that the Jewish community in Belgium will have above average infections and possibly deaths due to the close-knit communal structure that they have there. However, we'll have to wait and see, and hopefully everything will get back to normal soon.
Thank you so much for all of the information you have sent. It's very important to know all of these details. It's fascinating to see how probably the challenge to Judaism is similar to the challenge to Christianity and Islam, but in a different way. For example, Christianity is now not just in somehow blaming, especially Europe, of relying so much on logic and science and keeping itself away from the religion. And there is this huge debate in Middle East now is how can we go back to more religious influence in our daily life. And they were using all of these materials, proving that, look, if you have already used this, which is mentioned in your religion, you wouldn't get corona. And they are starting to find all of these things. But what's fascinating of what you mentioned here is how such kind of pandemics like Corona is becoming a challenge to everyone, and it might change traditions. Before I open the floor to questions, I would like to know if there were any kind of artistic response to this. What you mentioned about the textbook for children is a very important thing to know, how the community is working in order to raise awareness about the risk of coronavirus. Were there any artists within the Jewish community, whether in New York or other communities, trying to use their talents in order to raise awareness of coronavirus?
I don't know about artists per se. I have seen some music, little songs or videos on WhatsApp in Yiddish, sort of advising people what to do, and some humorous directives. But in terms of the arts per se, I'm not very aware.
Okay, the floor is open now for questions.
Hello?
Hello?
Did somebody have a question? I have a question if the floor is available.
I think it is.
Okay. I was curious, like when you were mentioning, Rabbi, about different sort of letters and material that was recorded going back to, I think it was the 16th century. Is there kind of, this is not something that happens very regularly. So is it something that is generally already recognized? Like somebody says, oh, we can turn to this letter in particular, or is it considered something more obscure? Like how often do these types of decisions and these specific traditions, how often do they come up in regular times when there's no sort of a health crisis?
So you're asking, where do we find these kinds of old letters and previous instances of pandemics in Jewish legal literature?
Yeah, especially from kind of in the way that it's transmitted or taught. You know, I'm curious, is it taught as like, this is the material related to a pandemic? Is it something that's been kind of, people had to kind of scour a bit and being like, well, I remember this other thing from this, you know, or is it kind of treated as like one whole body of legal tradition specifically about pandemics? I'm just kind of curious, like, how are people kind of going through the material and whatnot?
Well, there is a tractate of the Talmud called Masechta Tanis, which deals with what a communal response should be in instances of famine, of drought, of war, of plague. So there are a lot of commentaries of the Talmud that go throughout the generations. I mean, you have to be a scholar in Jewish law in order to know where to find these things. There are a lot of obscure texts that people are finding now, and you know, on WhatsApp, you know, I'll get somebody sending me something, hey, look at this, I found this from the 1400s, or I found this from, you know, Rabbi so-and-so apparently said this. You sort of have to know where to look, but I mean, there are obscure cases, but the one from the 1600s is I never heard of it before, but people who I've sent it to said, oh yeah, that's a famous letter. So.
Oh, that's so interesting. So aside from like the tract in the Talmud, there's not like a single authoritative volume for a particular community about saying, this is how we address these types of things. Because I would be kind of curious also if there's kind of like a concentrated sort of like volume or like previous studies and whatnot, and there might be a lot of kind of superstitions or traditions also included in there. But it sounds kind of, the impression I had was that because it's happened so infrequently, that it's generally something kind of fades into the background almost.
It does. I mean, we don't have pandemics as much as we had 200-300 years ago or 1,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So most of these cases are very old. We don't really have a lot of modern writings on what to do. And what we have tends to fly in the face of modern germ theory, such as if there's a pandemic, you have to leave town. Nowadays, we'd say you have to stay put, otherwise you're going to spread it. But, you know.
I guess one last question I have is that if things were to kind of like continue in the direction of digitization, especially the idea that you can have Zoom open like even before Shabbat begins, like that was surprising. Then
Mhm.
like how would there be issues of like separation between genders? Would that just be like everybody has to be with cameras off, it's just audio, or how would that be handled? If there were perhaps even like maybe a wedding? I'm just kind of like curious if there's been more thoughts about how things could go if there were like video conferencing.
Video conferencing generally would be between men and men, not between. So for a class in the ultra-Orthodox community online, generally would not have women there. There's strict separation between men and women in the Jewish community. And are you talking about like what would happen at the Seder? I mean, I think a camera would be on at the table and we'd see everybody sitting there, men and women. So, but in terms of online prayer services, online prayer services in Jewish law doesn't constitute a quorum of 10 people. So it's more of just of a feeling of togetherness more than an actual minyan, as we would say.
Oh, that's interesting. And then would there be like with the presence? I'm just kind of, because it's such a it's such an interesting concept. I'm just curious, like, kind of what people's kind of feelings are on it. Even like if there's if there were a minyan that were through video conferencing, would there be the idea that there's like a divine presence with each individual separately, or is it something much more almost like spiritual, where it's like the divine presence is not limited towards a specific place?
So I asked someone about this. So generally, without coronavirus, people would have to pray in the synagogue in a group of 10 or more people. And for example, the Talmud says that prayer in public is accepted in heaven better than individual prayer. So if I'm praying in my house, God's going to scrutinize my requests more than if I was at the community, because the community is loftier than the individual. The individual is more blemished. So I said, given now that we are forced to daven, to pray alone, does that mean that by praying alone, it's as if we're praying as a community, or are we all being scrutinized right now? So like, nobody really knows.
Can we give the floor to the others, Levi? Thank you. You asked very interesting questions. We will come back to them.
Thank you.
The floor is open to your questions.
I got one. Do you see the result of this coronavirus after everything calms down? Do you think that some of the ultra-Orthodox communities are going to be adopting technology, or at least I know in certain areas, like in Israel, there's been an issue with particularly the ultra-Orthodox schools. There's not really, science isn't really taught there. Do you think that that's going to change at all?
I don't think it's going to change. I think the community is very entrenched in their positions. I have people calling me several times a day for news and developments because they don't have access to information. And they're not trying to get access other than asking people that they know have access. So nobody is turning on the radio in their car. Nobody that I know of. Maybe they are. But I don't think it's going to change the school curriculum. I don't think it's going to change too much. I'd be surprised if it would, but I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Right. Given with the trajectory and how it's going so far. So
yeah, I do think that we might see more people, more of an embrace, at least among the public. So we have the authority of the rabbis down to the people, and then we have the actions of the people, and it goes back up. Understand? So I think I've seen in the last several years more and more people getting active on social media and getting smartphones and stuff, although the rabbis generally are against it. I think the reality is that people are tuning into it more given issues that we have now. So I think we might see more of an embrace at arm's length of technology.
And it's interesting, the ultra-Orthodox position, because I'm a Reform Jew. And so we've been embracing technology for like live streaming and like taking classes using technology and Zoom, because most of the people who go to my shul are a lot older. So it's more important that the community protects them. And we are using Zoom more often for classes such as Jewish history or Torah study.
Yeah, I know that the Reform movement was very quick to close down their synagogues and institutions on the advice of health professionals. Whereas here in Baltimore, where I am, the Orthodox community dragged its feet. Although they complied before it became mandated, there was a couple synagogues that refused to close down until the city made them.
I think the Orthodox community, and I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, by the way, I know the rabbi there, and he followed through with the health officials when it started to get bad. And Chabad's now closed down, has mostly closed down. They usually have like challah that they'll make, and everybody from the Jewish community gets their challah there, and they've stopped production because of the spread. So it's been very interesting to see how that's going to start changing things.
I just got a letter from the Baltimore Orthodox Vaad, which is the group of rabbis that give the religious advice for the city. And since Passover is 2 weeks away, there are certain issues that need to be dealt with in terms of food and making pots and pans kosher for Passover. And usually the Vaad would have a place to make your pots and pans kosher by immersing it in boiling water and these things, but they're canceling all these things because they don't want people getting too close, and even the mikveh for dishes is closed because they don't want people congregating there. So it'll
be interesting to see the response to all of this too from each of the movements.
Yeah, back to Levi's original question about, the where to find texts about pandemics. I think that this will give a new, life to rabbinic writings about what to do in a pandemic. Very much. We're gonna see a plethora of.
Yeah, Rabbi, I have a question. If anyone doesn't have a question, I will ask mine. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know whether you've discussed already. Sorry, I got confused between the time. I thought it's half an hour. Anyway, so what I think, whether the corona or whether we're going to have more type of pandemics, I don't think it's a short phase. I think it's going to carry on for a very long time.
I agree.
What do you think will happen? As I said, I'm not sure, probably you've already discussed it, but a couple of things I was wondering about. What people will do about their regular prayers and gathering, whether in synagogue or mosque or church, with all the ceremonies associated with it, with their close contact and really not social distancing and sharing things. So this will be a long term. Do you think there will be some adjustment within the main religions to do this? The second issue is the ceremonies. You've already discussed the Passover, and there will be people going, visiting shrines, there will be, Easter. Do you think with what's happening now, do you think people will realize these things should change, and then we're going to have different way of practicing a religion?
I mean, I know in temporary right now, the Catholic Church have started, I know that there's a church not far from here, they're having drive-through communion. So instead of having people in church, people drive through their car and they take their Eucharist there. I think it's too early to know exactly what's going to happen even 2-3 weeks from now. But in terms of festivals at Jewish shrines in Israel, I would imagine that they're all going to be canceled for now. I mean, if this lingers on for the next few years, I have no idea what the community is going to look like. As I said earlier, there's prayers that we can say at home, but there's certain prayers that we're going to have to skip because these can only be said in public. And yeah, it's very, very
do you expect, because we can see it in the Orthodox Church, there's a big disagreement. We can hear, we heard stories coming from Greece, and for the Coptic Orthodox in Egypt, where there's a disagreement within the church about some people are quite radical to say, no, we should not, because we're going to be saved. And also, I'm from Iraq, so there are some people saying, do not let this, don't stop visiting that shrine just because of there's whatever conspiracy or whatever. Do you think we'll end up having a rift within within the religious groups about this? Because we started to hear influential people giving mixed messages publicly.
I think generally the Jewish community is mostly cooperative with the authorities and the official advice. I think, especially after the last week and a half, I think everybody's realized that this is a serious issue. Initially, you probably missed it when I spoke about it, there were rabbis who were saying, no, we should not close the schools, we should not close the synagogues because these things will protect us. But I think now everyone is on board. There are obviously going to be a few people here and there who are going to keep their synagogues open, and people who aren't going to listen to the rabbis or going to ignore the legal authorities. But yeah, I've seen the videos from people in Qom in Iran trying to say we have to open up the shrine there, here and there. I know Lalish, the Yazidi shrines in Lalish are closed. But
sorry, just one more question, I promise.
Sure.
Looking at it differently, just turning the coin, do you think it will bring people together having a similar suffering, a similar problem?
You mean from community to community, like inter-communities? Like Muslims and Jews and...
Every year, basically. Well, yes, all communities. Because you can see even, with Chinese people are closer because we have the same, and we've been overwhelmed by how much they provided us with literature. And they really, I mean, for us, I'm a doctor, the fact that they released to us the sequencing of the virus straight away, they published everything straight away. And then equally, you get a receiving end from the American side with all the prestigious papers, accepting them, helping them, supporting them, and sort of distributing all the information. I feel in a way we are, I don't know, this is the silver lining. I don't know, maybe I'm just trying to hold on into something because I'm sort of in the middle of it and I find it very distressing. But I think it will bring people together.
I think in some ways it will. I remember after September 11th in America, which was a big traumatic experience for Americans, that everybody was cooperating and brotherly for a couple of years, and then slowly things, went back to normal. But I don't know. I think we'll have to see.
Time will tell.
Time will tell.
I think I disagree with the idea that the people will come together, especially communities on national level and internationally. We have seen more people now talking about if our borders were closed, we wouldn't have Corona. If our community was closed, we wouldn't have Corona. If we didn't accept this and that, we wouldn't have all of this kind of problems, because we would have known who are our communities and who are our people. So
I think this is slightly different. This is a practical. It's a practical solution because we won't. If we look at how the Chinese approach the crisis versus, because we have the Chinese experience and the Italian experience, and we know what was the outcome from both. The Chinese, with the aggressive measures, they closed the Wuhan themselves within China itself, and that was a practical solution. And all countries should have gone on lockdown straight away. this is, I don't know, this is my, as I said, probably my views are slightly limited by purely the health side of things.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
That's correct for China. Who wants to speak?
I mean, I saw someone sent me a video from New Jersey yesterday of an Orthodox Jew was at a Toyota dealership trying to get his car fixed, but he was told to go home because he says the Jews are spreading the disease, so we don't want you here. You have to go home.
Yeah, I've heard that too, with the anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that has a lot to do with the delayed response to social isolating because they didn't understand what was going on initially.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we haven't heard from Karin and Zena. If you have any questions or comments. Okay. I have this question because as a historian, I always focus on such kind of events and the challenge it poses on traditions. What do you think coronavirus as a pandemic and as a social problem, not just a health problem, what's the main challenge it's imposing on the traditions of the Orthodox Judaism, not the other sects of the Judaism? We know that there are secular Jewish who have access to secular newspapers, they have access to news, they have access to all of the public information, and they might contribute to help the other kind of Jewish communities in order to understand the risk of corona. But what's the main challenge, like in the long term, what's the main challenge that corona is imposing on the traditions, the heart of the Jewish, Orthodox Jewish traditions? Like, as you say, there are gatherings, as I mentioned in the very beginning of this talk. I mean, there are things that cannot be done unless people come together.
I think that's the biggest difference right now. It's the closure of our institutions where, you know, people, I can't even begin to describe like the importance of our institutions to our community. Everything is on halt. It's unprecedented. It hasn't been this way since Poland in World War II.
Yeah.
Will it open ways for the secular Jewish to talk more about reform, about integrating more art, more non-secular or secular things into the Orthodox Judaism?
No, I think any changes in Orthodox Judaism have to come from Orthodox Judaism. Mm-hmm. They're very hostile to outside influence, yes. especially non-Orthodox Jews.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dr. Muthanna,
I actually, yeah, sorry. Yes.
No, go ahead. I just want to give you the floor. I don't know if you are in Iraq or in
I'm in London.
Okay, but
London.
I'm sure you have access to the information and the updates of Corona. And if you would share with us the specifically the Iraqi community response to Corona in the UK, if you have access to this.
Yes. Okay, to be honest with you, there's no such thing as Iraqi community because you mix with the people that you can talk to. Yes. So I end up mixing with, where I work in central London in a big hospital, the hospital. So I mix with, and the Iraqis I meet in general are professionals. So they are quite integrated, following the rules, staying at home. And I can't, honestly, I can't say how important it's for everyone to stay at home because this is nasty. It's spread so easily spread between people, and it's nasty. We can see it. So young people say, of course, all the people are the ones who are being hit hard, but young people have been getting it. One of the things I noticed after the lockdown, so after I was really exhausted because I did a whole week of being on call, and for me, it's a matter of time before I get it. And I was walking to a big station traveling home because their trains are still running, not as frequent. And I noticed there's a slight, so the roads were empty. So I'm talking central London, so the inner part of the city. And this is the place I commute to regularly. And I slightly felt it was unsafe for the first time. And then I was slightly alarmed by the comment from the rabbi about people are blaming it on the Jewish community bringing the virus. I don't know why.
Is this in the UK, you mean?
In the UK, it was settled. It was settled. There wasn't anything. There wasn't any lawlessness. But I've noticed two things. So the nicecities, when people are stressed, they are not as nice, and they will start to be, not because they're British in general, they are very polite. They're very careful about how they speak. That's slightly changed because we realize actually the whole thing is fragile. We thought we are very protected, but we realize everything is fragile. So yesterday, when I was walking home, it wasn't that late, but it did not feel as safe. I could see it's not like Mad Max, but I worry, is it a start, some degree of lawlessness, and would be people who are visibly different. So that's why, as an example, Orthodox Jewish person is visibly different. And I was alarmed by the comment that people started saying they spread it. And
that's also sorry. It's that's also been a trope for a long time. If you look back to the Black Plague going that far, Jews were blamed for the plague. For historical reasons, they were separated. The perception was like they weren't getting it. This is where we start seeing blood libel and the idea of poisoning the wells. That's where it comes from. And so to me, the idea of people blaming the Jews for this or blaming Israel for the virus is just resurrecting an old trope that's been here for quite some time. Now, I've been lucky that I haven't had any anti-Semitic experiences being in Birmingham due to this, but I've been on Twitter and I follow a lot of Jewish people on Twitter, and it is kind of scary to see that this is coming back again. And it makes me worried.
Well, luckily it's not the case. I mean, in general, I haven't heard it in the UK yet, but it is alarming. It is alarming that such conversations started.
Yeah, I'm more worried about I have a very dear friend of mine who's Chinese. Actually, her grandparents were in the province in Wuhan, but they weren't in the city that was quarantined, and that just got lifted, and she was worried sick for months about it. But her grandparents are doing really well. They didn't catch the virus. They're lucky. But yeah, I was asking her, have you been facing any discrimination? She's like, no, I haven't. I've been working at home because as soon as at least in the US, as soon as we heard like this was getting bad, everybody was sent to, if you could work remotely, you can work remotely. So I've been working remotely. She's been working remotely. But she also did Chinese people directly.
In every country, in every community, the communities are trying to give an identity to the virus. And this is what I have seen myself here in France, for example, from the early days, before the French people realized that coronavirus is really dangerous and it's really gonna take lives, claim lives. Before this happened, they weren't actually discussing the virus itself. They were thinking that it's something related to Italy because Italy is not taking all the measurements to stop the virus. But when it came to France and the number rose to more than 15,000, they actually started giving an identity to the virus. And the identity of this virus is mainly, for many of them, it's a Chinese virus. And we have seen also in the media, in the United States, the American president is insisting on calling it the China virus, and then changing this from China virus to the Chinese virus. And China sent medical equipment and support to France. Instead of responding to China by thanking China, they put on Twitter, on the social media, the hashtag merci le Chine, thank you China, but the content of the tweets and the social media contents, it's all about spreading hate against the Chinese. I have seen many Chinese here also kind of like self-censor themselves. They close their shops. By the way, most of the tobacco shops in France are run by Chinese or Asians in general. So this problem of giving an identity to a virus is really alarming, and that's the main reason why we started this discussion of what we call it corona talks, because it's just the virus. It doesn't have an identity, it doesn't have a religion, but it's gonna have consequences and impacts on all of the religions, traditions, and communities. It might lead to bigger social problems than we anticipate. So that's why we hope that we continue this kind of discussions and we hear all the different perspectives. It's not about making judgments. It's more about hearing each other and trying to understand how we can stop this narrative from growing. The narrative of giving an identity to the illness, an identity to the virus, is a very dangerous thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's,
I mean,
sorry.
go ahead.
No, it's basically it's just as interesting, just looking at the virus here. So here in London, it's, we have lots of cases, and you call, because my brother has it, and he's managed at home, and hopefully he's protected by his age, and he's well. He's fit and healthy, so hopefully he'll be fine. He went through the worst, and hopefully he's on the recovery, but we'll see. But the thing is, back home in Iraq, if you are diagnosed to have corona, they take you to the hospital and they isolate you. And while here, you call them, they say, self-isolate yourself. And you tell them, they go through a questionnaire. If they don't think that you are sick enough, they say, stay at home and come to us if there's a problem. And I was just thinking about how it works differently, because back home people are together. It's difficult to isolate yourself. People live with extended family, and they have all the sort of ceremonies. So they end up, because they expect the person who's infected will socialize with the others, and everyone, to show the love, will do intimate contact and touch them and hug them. And so I was just telling them, guys, if they take you to the hospital, just say yes, because here, we can't. I mean, with my brother, they just said no, since he is okay. He doesn't have significant respiratory issue. He wasn't even tested, actually.
Yeah, I mean, that's what they're telling us in the U.S. too. In the state that I'm in, which is Alabama, it's one of the, we're the last in everything. So you could say we are definitely the worst, but in terms of healthcare, a lot of the rural hospitals have already been shutting down due to budgeting issues. And they're saying here that it will hit us hard, because especially in rural areas, because of those hospital closures. And also, we just don't have enough ventilators or supplies or even tests. There's been an issue of there's not enough testing to go around. There was if you want to get tested, you have to call in, you have to make an appointment, you have to go to this particular area, and there's only a criteria of what you can be tested for. And they're telling everybody to stay home. My city in particular now has a shelter in place, so nobody's allowed to leave unless they have to.
That's good.
And
Yeah, to be honest, yeah, I mean, staying at home is the best, really. I mean, here, and we recently, I mean, over the last week, the testing kit is more available, and
yeah,
our scientists in the hospital are stepping up. So we're doing our own testing actually on our patients.
Can we go back to Levy because he couldn't continue?
We are boring him.
Yeah. Levy, you were talking about something important, and could you continue, please?
Oh, I was just really curious about how some of like the spiritual aspects of different things that have to be done, like a physical presence, how those were handled. But I just wanted to mention that with the questions about kind of, you know, will things get like better or worse, they come from like inside or outside, that was all really interesting to listen to. I'm trying to think if I have a specific question, because I most everything that I was curious about was kind of tidily, very helpfully responded to. I'm trying to think if there was any. I would need a minute because I'm going to have to run through my recollection, see if there's anything else specifically.
Yeah, take your time. Would you give us more insights, Rabbi, on the mainly the you mentioned something very important and it's also serious about the mikvah and how this is gonna raise probably family problems among the Jewish community. Do you think that if this will last longer, that the rabbis will have to give an exemption to the families to no?
No, these are rules that come from the Torah, and the rabbis don't have the authority to turn that over. Like I said, Judaism is decentralized. The rabbi's authority comes from the Torah and the writings, so they're not like Catholic priests who can give a dispensation.
Yes.
You know, it's more written in stone. You know, as Moses came down from the mountain in stone, this is how it is.
Yeah.
So.
One question I have is that, like the idea of using Zoom, there might be perhaps like, I don't want to say a bending, but like for example, I think instead of using a proper mikvah, it would be allowed to use maybe like a river or an ocean, and then issues of modesty could be concerned with like maybe providing like a Queen Victoria style tent where she would bathe in her pond, but she would literally have a roaming tent that would be pulled into the pond so she could bathe in the pond and not have anybody actually see her bathing.
I did not know that, and that's cool to know.
It's a really interesting thing. And so I'm just kind of curious, in particular, like would it be possible that people could use the ocean water? I think in Maryland you're on the coast also, so there might be
the ocean is proper for a mikvah. There will be leniencies taken. I've seen a bunch of leniencies in other matters. You know, they're too technical to talk about here, but there are lenient opinions on certain issues that people are taking specifically for this crisis. It's not to be taken in a general form. But for the mikvah, I think it'll be harder in places like Brooklyn, especially if there's a stay-at-home issue. Like you can't go drive an hour to the beach anyway, right?
Fair enough, yeah.
But I can talk about the Zoom in more detail if you want. So it's not for the Sabbath. On the Sabbath, it would not be allowed at all because the rules are more strict when it comes to electricity, fire, these things. For holidays, which are Sabbath-like, you are, according to Sephardic tradition, you could have fires on the holiday. So the Sephardic rabbis were saying that you could have the computer on from before the holiday starts and just have it on untouched, and this could be used to broadcast your Passover Seder and this. The Ashkenazic European rabbis would never have said such a thing. But even among the Sephardic rabbis, the leading Sephardic rabbi of this generation was Ovadia Yosef, who I believe was also Iraqi. Yeah. But he disagreed with that, so he would not have allowed the Zoom in the first place. So there was a whole debate on social media, how could these rabbis allow this? So the rabbis retracted it. So among the Orthodox community, there will be no Zoom of the Passover Seder because it was too much of a
And this is gonna increase the risk among the community, right?
No. I mean, the initial letter said that in a case of grave danger, you could have the Zoom in order for people who are isolated.
Mm-hmm.
But the question is, what's the grave danger about broadcasting your grandkids saying Manishtana at the Seder? Like, it's not gonna save anyone's life to watch your grandkids sing, you know.
Would the exception be in terms of mental health? Because like
you could say that possibly.
Yeah.
I mean,
because like we do know that from the study of Elise and SARS when they did the study after in 2003 when people were isolated, their mental health really took a toll because humans are just social animals. They need that interaction. So for people who are more at risk of depression, the lack of social interaction could be dangerous. It could be necessary in that regard.
I think that was the consideration of these rabbis who came out with that letter, but apparently rabbis who are more eminent and higher up, they had to defer to them. They retracted their statement.
Yeah, Dr. Muthanna, you wanted to say something?
No, it's just interesting. To be honest with you, my experience in general with my patients, I've never had a problem whenever there's a medical necessity, because where we work, we have a big Orthodox Jewish community and we have Muslim community, and I don't think I've ever had, I mean, extremely rare.
That close to Sanford Hill?
Yes, any type of medical treatment, regardless. I looked after people on, during, significant holidays, and we've never had, I mean, when it comes to health, as far as I prove, in general, I find the rabbis helpful or the imam. I speak to them, and then when they speak to the patient or the parent, usually I've never had a problem, to be honest.
I mean, in a place of real danger, all Jewish law gets thrown out the window because saving life is the Jewish law.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's interesting going back to the to consider it as a mental health well-being, mental well-being.
But it would have to be mental health that is actually going to endanger the life. Being a little bit depressed and bored is not significant mental health. And
just for me, the whole concept is I didn't think about it, but actually it's a concept I haven't thought about it. So.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that question comes up more in religious debates about abortion. I mean, generally Judaism is more lenient about abortion than other religions. However, abortion, it's not.
There's a lot.
There's a lot of rules about when you could get it. It has to be, the life of the mother is more important. But then some rabbis have written that you can take mental health into account. But what does that mean? If I'm just going to be depressed because I'm going to be pregnant, or I'm going to be postpartum depression, seriously, it's not enough. So there's no real rubric to know when considerations of mental health should be used to override religious law.
Case by case.
Yeah, case by case, which is what apparently this letter was. It was a specific case for one person. They said you can use Zoom. And then someone wrote up a letter saying, the rabbis say you can use Zoom. It says, no, it wasn't supposed to be.
It was for one person, and this is why we can't have nice things anymore.
We'll do that.
Yeah. Rabbi, in 2 minutes, if you would like to summarize or to give your own thoughts of Corona and its impact on the community from your own perspective, not from the Orthodox Judaism perspective, your personal
perspective.
Yeah.
I'm pretty bored. I have run out of books to read, and I'm staying with my grandparents, and I've been helping them around cooking and groceries and these things, but generally staying inside. I haven't really left the house for 2 weeks. I hope things get back to normal. It's even infected my dreams. Last night I had a dream that I was at a bar associate, like for the state's lawyers association networking event. And we were there, and I said, wait a minute, we're not supposed to be here. We can't all be together. We all have to go home. Coronavirus. I was like, well, running back into the house, you know. So it's like, it's just permeated my mind so much that I just can't wait for this to be over. So.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank
and
you,
everybody
everyone.
stay safe.
Thank you.
You too.
Stay home and stay safe.
Stay home.
Thank you, Dr. Muthanna. Thank you, Karin,
Thank you
Levy,
so much for-
Ariana, and Rabbi, and for the others who left earlier. Thank you, everyone. We will have on Saturday, I will announce this, someone who is going to explain to us the impacts of Corona on the cultural and artistic activities, because we have seen that thousands of activities, events have been closed or postponed. We want to see and to explore what does this mean and how can we find alternatives and other kind of solutions. And the main question is, are we going to get used to the solutions that we are finding now, and then when Corona is done, we will find it like so difficult to go back to the pre-Corona? So this is also another challenge we have to discuss in the next talks yet to come. Thank you so much. Stay safe, stay home.
Be well.
All right. You will.
Bye.